us the signals, and then bingo, we go. Okay. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Zoning Hearing Board in Lower Providence Township. Thursday, February the 26th. Would you please rise and pledge the flag of the board?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We're going to try something a little different this evening, and we're going to have the board members introduce themselves, starting with Mrs. Foley.
Good evening, Joyce Fluhley, and I'm the Gail Hager, present time.
Keith McLennan, solicitor.
Tom Borai, Chairman, here.
Kathy Esky, Vice Chair.
Thank you. Hearing number 1 is on the agenda tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, if you're here this evening, oh wait a minute, we have to read the rules for the road. Kathy, please.
The zoning hearing board will give all interested parties an opportunity to ask questions and testify in connection with the application being heard tonight. After a witness for the application completes their testimony, you will be given the opportunity to ask questions of that witness. In addition, after the applicant has completed the case, you also have an opportunity to give testimony, which will be required to be sworn in. If you wish to participate in the hearing on the application, you should complete the entry of appearance form, which will be provided to you by the zoning officer who is sitting next to the court reporter. We ask your cooperation in maintaining silence during the hearing so that both the board and the court reporter can hear your testimony. We also ask that all cell phones be turned off.
Thank you, Chair. Before we continue with the zoning hearing meeting, I have a public announcement. Before anybody starts running out the door, the zoning board's in search of 2 alternate members of the board. The pay's great. The hours are few. That's providing you only have 1 case. If you have 3 or 4 cases, you get out of here at midnight. The supervisors do the appointment, so if anybody's interested, it's not a bad job. If you're interested in your township, you're interested in what's going on, it's quite a rewarding venture, believe me. You sent your resume to the Board of Supervisors. They're the ones that do the appointments. Thank you. Chief, would you explain the format, please, of the meeting?
Ladies and gentlemen, the way this works is it's similar to a formal court proceeding, except for the fact that we're informal in many respects. Although the rules of evidence should apply, we often are liberal with respect to how we do it. But if anybody has a stake in the outcome here, they have a right to speak. We'll ask for members of the audience if you want to speak. I would encourage all of you to, in essence, if I see a group of folks out there, even though I don't have my glasses on, but I see a group of folks out there, I would encourage you to get together and sort of consolidate your remarks so that we're not here until the wee hours of the morning, because I suspect that a lot of you are going to say similar things. So if you haven't already gotten together on that, you may want to do that. I think that the applicant is represented here this evening, and I suspect that he's ready to go and understands the process. But for those of you who are quote-unquote rookies, don't be intimidated. We don't fight. We're here to hear what you have to say, and rule based upon what it is that we hear tonight. So, thanks for your attention. And Chair, if you're ready to read, or you want me to read it?
No, Joyce, would you do us an honor, please?
Our hearing tonight is C-1302, Singular Wireless PCS LLC, doing business as AT&T Mobility, 182 Level Road, Collegeville, PA 19426. The applicant is requesting a variance to allow the installation of a wireless telecommunications facility on the property, which would consist of a 130-foot monopole to be housed within a 75 by 75 fenced compound. 12 panel-style antennas will be attached to the top of the tower on an antenna platform. Communications equipment, antennas, and towers are not a permitted use in the R1 residential zoning district. So the parcel ID of the subject property is 43-00-07240-007. Subject property is located at 182 Level Road, Collegeville, PA, and it is in the R1 residential zoning district. And this is a matter that was continued from an application to the zoning board dated July 25th, 2013.
That was a few years ago, right? Incidentally, now, this has to do with a tower on Level Road next to our Arrowhead School. It has nothing to do with Audubon or Audubon School. So if anybody was told that it had something to do with Audubon School, you may be wasting your time. You may want to go home and watch TV. Other than that, Mr. Cruz, we're ready for you, sir.
And one other housekeeping matter, the matter did come before the board in 2013. However, a continuance was granted for purposes of allowing the township to meet with the applicant to see if something could be worked out that was more amenable to the township. And my understanding is that those discussions have taken their course, and they haven't necessarily resulted in any decision one way or the other. And Mr. Kuche, you can tell us in summary where that stands.
I certainly will. Thank you and good evening. Nicholas Kuche here on behalf of the applicant this evening. Before I start giving the history of things, I have pre-marked exhibit packets, and I also gave Mike Merzinski a copy electronically, a flash drive that we can go through. If I could hand those up at this
Great.
time.
Thank you.
We need 5.
Just 5?
Mr. Hart.
We should have one for him. We should keep one for him, in case it's...
I have plenty.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
So a bit of history before we get into testimony. We had applied for zoning back in 2013 originally for this particular property, which is 182 Level Road. As noted, we were looking to place a 130-foot monopole, 12 antennas attached thereto, lightning rod, within a 75 by 75-foot compound. We were asked to come in and speak with the township at a staff meeting. At that time, the township, this was actually at that time, the township solicitor was Mike Sheridan before John Rice has taken over. So we're going back a little ways. The township informed us that they were in opposition to this application, and if there was anything we could do to work with the township. And this is not in your exhibit packet, however, I have them loose and we could make it part of the record if need be. I wasn't sure for historic purposes if it needed to be, but in that regard. So, as it says here, here is the proposed monopole that is the subject of this evening's application. So in meeting with the township, this property here and this property here, and actually all around is, as you know, state park, federal park, state park. Part of it is leased by the township. So the thought was, well, hey, can you can you maybe do something here? Township gets some revenue, and we can sort something out. So we went down that rabbit hole for quite some time. DCNR got involved. Senator Rafferty got involved. We were trying to make it work as best as possible. We had multiple meetings out at the property with engineers, with DCNR, the senator's aide, to try to make this work, where we were going to have equipment here, and we were going to replace one of the light standards on the field. It was going to be roughly the same size. And as you can see here, it is 585 feet from where we are proposing now. Not an appreciable amount, if you will. Unfortunately, we had an issue whereby DCNR could not help us at all, could not help the township. Senator Rafferty, unfortunately, his hands were tied and could not assist in any way, shape, or form without some type of legislation. However, there were also issues with how the land was purchased. There were some, conservation monies. So it became unmanageable, essentially. So fast forward a couple of years, a month and a half ago, we requested a staff meeting with the township. Now, John Rice as the solicitor. And we met and went through the history of things. They were fully aware. I mean, all parties have been talking this whole time. And we said, we still need this site. We still have gaps in coverage. We don't have reliable coverage. So we need to move forward. The township understood. They lifted their opposition. We activated our application, and here we are this evening. So that is the history of what we tried to do. 485 feet away. Now, again, before jumping in here, we have a couple revisions to the relief that we're requesting. As you know, we requested a use variance because this is in the R1 district. This use is not allowed, not permitted. So we have a use variance to permit such a use. We also were requesting a variance for the antenna size, as we were proposing larger antennas, 8 feet, 6 feet, where prescribed in the ordinance is 5 feet in length, if you will. Then we were also requesting a height variance because we had a 130-foot monopole with antenna tips going above that and a lightning rod, where 100 feet total, that is with appurtenances per your ordinance, is allowed for telecommunications. And finally, we have a setback issue to this property line right here. We need to be 250 feet from a residential property line, albeit it's the park, it's still a residential line. So what we did,
Excuse me,
yes.
you come back on that height again, you says the township's 100 feet. You originally were looking for 130
Yes,
with a, if I recall correctly, a 6-foot lightning rod on it, which take it up to 136.
that's correct.
And what do you want to change it to now?
Right. So what we're doing is we're amending our application this evening. Our pole will be 100 feet even. The antenna heights will be 100 feet. There will be no lightning rod. Everything will be 100 feet, no more, to meet your ordinance. So we do not need that variance any longer. Also, we were able to use smaller sized antennas, so we can use 4-foot antennas for this installation. Okay, all of them. So we do not need a variance from the antenna length provision in your ordinance.
So you're looking from a 12-foot to a 4-foot,
8-foot to a 4-foot.
8-foot to a 4-foot. And how
Yes,
many
sir.
you're looking for?
12 total antennas.
12 total.
That has not changed.
The reason why I'm asking you this, sir, there's only 2 members up here that was here in 2013. Kathy wasn't here, Gail wasn't here, and our legal beagle wasn't here, so by you doing this too, and there may be additional people in the audience that wasn't here either, so that's the only reason why I'm asking you to repeat.
I appreciate, many players have changed. I think I'm one of the few players that have remained throughout this process. I know Mr. Mrzinski new to the process. I think the township manager may have been the only other remaining member that has been constant throughout this process.
Change is great, that's why we're looking for alternates.
Yes, indeed. So I wanted to let you know, we are reducing our variance requests by 2, so instead of 4, we are requesting 2 variances, a use and a setback variance. That being said, I would be presenting the testimony of 3 witnesses this evening, our site acquisition consultant, our radio frequency engineer, and our professional engineer. Unless the board has any questions at this point in time or needs anything else from me at this point in time, I would go ahead and begin that presentation.
Any questions, anybody? Preliminary issues?
Not yet. Not at this point. Not yet. Not yet. Presentation.
I'm sorry?
Making it easy on you.
All right, so far. So my first witness I would be calling would be our site acquisition consultant, Mr. Jonathan Good. Actually, if I may, would you like all 3 witnesses sworn at the same time or as we go? Board's pleasure.
I'll sit right there if you like.
Yeah, they can do it all at once.
Great.
You don't want to see any of this. None of this.
You doing it, you want me to do it? Okay. Gents, you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give in this matter will be the whole truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. State your names for us, please.
Jonathan Good.
Okay. Mr. Good.
Brock Riffle.
Riffle.
Petros Chikalis.
I'm not going to try and pronounce that or spell it.
Call me Pete.
Pete. Thank you very much. You're welcome to sit, however you want to do it, whatever you feel most comfortable doing.
Thank you. Please state your name and business address for the record.
Jonathan Good. Business address is 1000 West 9th Avenue, King of Prussia, PA.
And by whom are you employed?
SmartLink.
You have to see him.
I want you to move out a little bit so she
Oh.
can see you further out.
How about I stand?
Stealing my thunder.
SmartLink.
And how are you associated with AT&T?
SmartLink is contracted by AT&T for site acquisition.
And are you authorized to appear this evening on behalf of AT&T?
I am.
And have you done so on prior occasions for
I
AT&T?
have.
Okay. And these have been at municipal type hearings, such as this one?
Correct.
Please very briefly describe the business engaged in by AT&T.
What we do is the client would contract us to find suitable sites for cell tower placements.
And AT&T needs to develop and maintain its network of cell sites for its technology to work, is that correct?
I would assume so, but that's not my area of expertise.
When you are searching for sites, do you like to co-locate on existing structures whenever possible?
Absolutely.
And in fact, co-location is the preferred method of building out a site, is that correct?
It is.
Which I don't want to make this more difficult for you, and I know you're trying to move this along, but I would like to have the witness sort of testify to a direct question as opposed to a leading question.
Sure.
I know that we don't necessarily, you can do it, but I'm just saying every question seems to be a leading question. And I know
Okay.
you're trying to get to the end, but I think that the witness is competent enough to really answer your questions directly, it seems to me.
Sure.
So I just prefer to do it that way if we can.
That's fine. Can you describe to the board the methodology used in selecting this particular site?
Sure. The client came to us with what's called a SARF, a search area ring. This is the area, SARF, S-A-R-F. It's where the client identifies their need for coverage. It gives us the parameters of what they're trying to cover. Basically, in this area, we had basically a quarter-mile ring to try to find a location to put a cell site. Trying to find, the first thing we do is we look for existing structures that we can co-locate on. Obviously, we look for an existing monopole or lattice tower, something that's already being used as a cell tower. If that's not available, any building, tall structure, or water tank. In this particular site, there is no tall structures available within the search area. There are water tanks, and that was one of the sites we did look at. Unfortunately, the water tanks are way below what is the height requirement for the coverage that AT&T needs.
John, I'm showing you what has been marked as Exhibit A3. Can you identify that exhibit for the board?
This is the zoning map with the search area ring on it.
And that is the same exhibit that is on the screen, is that correct?
That is correct.
And did you prepare this exhibit?
I did.
And can you describe to the board what this exhibit shows?
Basically what this is this is the search area ring that AT&T, our client, provided us, saying this is the area that they need to find a tower location for antennas to go on, either an existing structure or a cell tower. If there's none available, then we're looking at erecting a raw land build. So you can see where this is, the search area ring is covered. We're basically almost in the center of the search ring, which is ideal. However, we looked at all the areas adjacent to it within the search area ring, and there was nothing that we could co-locate on.
And what do you know what the designations are of the adjacent or any of the districts within the search ring?
Everything that's within the search area is residential.
And outside of the search ring, just to say, what is in the immediate area by way of zoning districts there?
More residential.
And I'm showing you an exhibit that has been marked as Exhibit A4. Can you identify that exhibit?
Yes, that is the search area ring over aerial view.
And can you identify, or can you explain to the board what this exhibit shows, please?
Yeah, so basically this is the same map of the area with the search area ring showing where we're trying to cover as far as the search area ring that AT&T needs to have a cell site in.
And seeing what, an aerial, what is within that search ring?
A park, water tanks, and a school and houses.
And as was noted earlier, is it your understanding that that park is not usable?
Correct. That was the one that we were trying to work with the township on.
In keeping in line with the township zoning ordinance, would AT&T remove its facility if unused for a period of 12 consecutive months?
Yes, if it's not being used, yes.
And could that be accomplished within 6 months of its abandonment?
Yes.
And does AT&T intend to place any signs or advertising on the tower or its equipment?
No, the only signs would be required by regulation as far as for the radio frequencies.
Those are all the questions I have for our site acquisition consultant this evening.
Joyce, do you have anything you want to
What is the topography of the area immediately where you would put the compound and this tower? What does the ground look like?
It's relatively flat, I mean, as far as what we're trying to go. I mean, it's not mountainous area.
But was there a reason originally you requested a much taller tower? And I wondered if that had to do with trying to pull in.
No, we originally, when you look at, if we're going to build a new tower, ideally you try to build the tower as tall as you can to get as many co-locators you can on it so you don't have to put up another tower nearby. Usually the thought process is instead of 5 monopoles in an area, you can narrow that down to 1 or 2. In this case, we're trying to fit within the ordinance,
I see.
so that's why the height difference.
And actually, John, before I let you go, we have the owner's authorization to appear here this evening, is that correct?
Yes.
Showing you what has been marked as Exhibit A2. Can you identify those exhibits to the board?
A2 is the executed lease. It's a notarized letter of authorization.
Thank you.
More questions? Gail, do you have any questions?
No, not this time.
Yeah, I do. You're saying that this tower will cover a quarter of a mile?
No, sir. No, that's just the search area ring that was narrowed down. As far as for the coverage, I would have to leave that to the RF expert.
All right, now, the way you have that circled there, that's going to be the coverage?
No, sir. No, this is what our client, this is what AT&T gave us, that they narrowed down where they need to have the cell site located at. As far as the coverage that that cell site would provide, I would defer that to the RF expert.
RF meaning radio frequency expert.
Yes, sir.
So basically, this tower is going to be a bounce-off tower with the 12 antennas on it that you're going to be bouncing off to go to another tower?
That might be better suited for a radio frequency engineer.
All
Yeah,
right.
the search area ring is not a coverage ring. The search area ring is where AT&T has identified they need to have a cell site within that area. The RF expert will testify what that cell site will provide in coverage.
All right, you're going to tell me what kind of tower it's going to be, or it's going to be somebody else? It says a monopole. Monopole. Now, a monopole, the way I did some research on a monopole is a tower like this. It goes up like this. It's not a flagpole.
No, sir. A monopole is a single pole tower. It's not a lattice tower. Is there an exhibit in the zoning drawing?
There are photo simulations. Our professional engineer would testify as to what this is going to look like, go through the plans with you and photo simulations of this particular structure.
It'd been wonderful if I would have had that stuff and I could have done my homework. I wouldn't have had to ask you those questions, wouldn't it? Instead of you coming up and giving me a big pile of papers, I got to go through this stuff here. I mean, the audience probably think I'm a dummy or I don't know what I'm doing, but you know what? I don't. That's why I'm asking the questions. I mean, it's embarrassing, seriously, to sit here and have you give me all these. We generally get plans and stuff 2 weeks before we sit down at these meetings. And to sit here and have to go through this and ask questions, it's just not right. I said my piece. Go ahead.
The question that I have with respect to your earlier comment that you've reduced the size of the tower to comply with the zoning ordinance, but that you do that for purposes of avoiding having to install other towers to get other coverage area.
For another carrier, if hypothetically, if another wireless carrier needed coverage in this area, they may need a height center line of 120 feet. That's where additional carriers can go on the pole. the carrier, AT&T, isn't going to have multiple center lines on the pole. They only need one.
So I misunderstood your testimony then, and the issue is, when you were looking for the higher tower, it was so that you could accommodate more carriers on that tower.
If more carriers were to come, right, correct.
Okay, but in this instance, that doesn't really matter because it's just AT&T that's going to be locating on this tower.
Correct. Another carrier could co-locate on it, but they would need to be obviously under the 100-foot.
So there's a risk then, it sounds to me, if the tower level goes down, because you can't accommodate more, that someone else could be coming in looking for a variance for an installation of a tower to accommodate their service.
That is a possibility.
Okay.
I do have a question. How did you determine just this particular area again?
The property is
Yes.
basically looking in the area where a monopole or cell tower would be the most inintrusive, is how we came to this property. Basically, you know, the residents on the opposite side of the road didn't have enough property available for the placement of it. The park is ideal, but we couldn't make that work.
So did you look at other places within the municipality? Or did you just zero in on
I-
this for some?
I have to stay within the search area ring, or it defeats the purpose for our client.
Okay, thank you.
I'd like to follow Kathy up. You know, we have 8 towers in the township now. You aware of that?
No, sir, I was not.
You aware that we have 2 towers on the prison farm? The highest peak in Montgomery County. Are you aware of that?
No, sir.
Did you try to go in to find out whether you could go onto those towers on the prison farm?
They're not in the search area ring.
They're very close to it, though, aren't they? No?
It's not
Well,
too-
I guess the question though is if they were to be moved to another, is the search area ring defined by, that's the optimal area to provide coverage for cell service? Is that the idea? Is that why they picked that?
That, I would have to defer that to the RF expert.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. You had mentioned that you had looked at the water towers, they weren't high enough.
Correct.
Is there any sort of, and you think that you're going to look stupid, here it comes, so be ready.
That's all right. We'll sit next to each other.
Is there a possibility of installing some sort of tower or connection to a water tower to extend the height in order to give you what you're looking for?
It can be done. These particular water tanks are the short, squat ones. So, and they're closer to the road. It would be more visible, and it would be more unattractive.
Obtrusive is what
Right.
you're saying.
Yes.
Wasn't that a proposal before, to put it on that water tower there?
You weren't on the board in 2013.
Well, that doesn't mean I wasn't involved.
I don't remember that, so I don't know.
I think there was some attempt.
Ask
to
him the
do-
question if he knows the answer.
Do you know that? There was some attempt?
Not by us.
Were you here in 2013?
No, sir.
Yeah.
Welcome to the
Maybe
press.
Maybe that gentleman knows. Do you know the answer to that?
I don't know the answer to that, and I was not here in 2013 for that application.
Yeah, we're at 20 questions.
And no answers.
Anybody else?
Go to the next one. I guess we go to radio frequency next, huh?
Right,
Whoever
whoever
they're
he wants. Okay, I have no other questions. You have any other questions?
Not at the
Okay,
moment.
thanks. Thank you. Mr. Good.
My next witness I will be calling is our radio frequency expert, Mr. Brock Riffle.
Don't go too far away. We got a lot of gray hair up here.
I thought I fixed that.
No, I don't think I'm going anywhere. Don't worry. Could you possibly bring it up a little bit? I'm sorry, I really
Yeah, I'm
can't.
just trying to make sure that, I guess you might be pulling it up there anyway.
Oh, okay.
There you go.
Let's see, that's far away too. 7 in our book. Gotcha. 7.
Please state your name and business address for the record.
Sure, it's Brock, B-R-O-C-K, Riffel, R-I-F-F-E-L. Address is 200 North Warner Road, King of Prussia, PA.
And by whom are you employed, Brock?
I'm employed by a company called RF Services.
And how are you affiliated with AT&T?
AT&T hires me for radio frequency design services. I've been supporting AT&T in this market and others since roughly 2001.
And can you briefly describe to the board your educational background?
Sure. I have a Bachelor's of Science in Electrical Engineering from Drexel University. I have roughly 17 years of radio frequency design experience with Verizon Wireless, AT&T, and Clearwire. I've testified in front of roughly well over 400 municipal boards throughout Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Maryland, and Delaware.
Have you been accepted as an expert in the field of radio frequency engineering in those municipalities?
Yes, I have.
And I'm showing you what is marked as Exhibit A5. Can you identify that exhibit?
Sure, that is my professional experience summary.
Sounded more impressive than this looks, though.
I can talk well better than I can type.
At this point, I would offer up Mr. Brock Riffel as an expert in the field of radio frequency engineering if the board has any voir dire.
Any questions? It's fine with us.
Thank you.
As a radio frequency engineer, what are your responsibilities with regard to AT&T?
So AT&T, as a service provider, is responsible for providing reliable service to all of their customers throughout their wireless area. To do so, they rely on engineers such as myself to tell them where their network is deficient. They do that through a number of different tools. One is a very sophisticated software tool, a propagation tool. Others include customer feedback. Another one may be drive testing that's done. A car drives around their whole entire network, collecting data in that car, and then that comes back to AT&T's office where they analyze it. And a radio frequency engineer such as myself takes all of these inputs in and comes up with a plan to provide reliable service throughout AT&T's network area or their licensed area.
Let me stop you there. You had noted reliable coverage as an FCC mandate.
Yes.
I'm showing you what is marked as Exhibit A6. Can you identify that exhibit for the board, please?
Sure, that's one of AT&T's cellular licenses as granted by the FCC.
And does that license take into account this municipality?
It does.
And you had talked about reliable coverage. Have you prepared an exhibit today showing the existing coverage in this area?
Yes, I have.
I'm showing you what is marked as Exhibit A7. Can you identify that exhibit?
Sure, it's titled AT&T's Existing Reliable Coverage, 850 megahertz at negative 85 dBm.
And did you prepare this document?
Yes, I did.
And for the record, you have a document on the easel. Is that just a larger version of the exhibit you just described in the packets?
It is, and it also matches the electronic version up on the screen.
Thank you. And did you prepare this document?
I did.
And can you describe to the board how you prepared this document?
Sure. It was created using a industry standard tool that AT&T uses throughout the United States. It's one of the most widely used tools throughout the world. It takes into account every single facility that AT&T has, what type of antennas they are, where they're pointed, what power levels are being used, how high they are. It also takes into account a lot of environmental data, such as clutter, what type of things are in the area. Are there trees? How tall are those trees? What type of trees are there? Terrain values. Does the terrain oscillate? At what height is the terrain at each one of these locations? All of these things are important to accurately model how radio frequency will act as it traverses through the air and as it hits obstacles such as trees, houses, dirt, etc. So using that industry standard tool, I was able to model what AT&T's existing reliable coverage looks like, and I'll define reliable as a AT&T customer can make and receive a phone call a high percentage of the time. In addition, that also translates to data. A very high component of AT&T and all wireless providers' usage comes from data, email, internet, text messages, video chat, et cetera, et cetera. And in those areas where there's reliable service, a AT&T customer will also be able to use their data service adequately. Conversely, an unreliable area, an AT&T customer will not be able to make and receive a phone call a high percentage of the time. And if they can, often that phone call will be of poor quality. It may cut in and out, it may drop, they may not be able to make another call. As I translate to data, that would include slow data speeds, data not making its way to its final endpoint, text messages not going through, internet being very slow. So on this first exhibit that is titled AT&T's Existing Reliable Coverage, what I'm showing you is what AT&T currently has today or in the very near future, and what is reliable and what is not. So there's two main colors on there. There's a green, which denotes the reliable service area, and then there's a white, which denotes the unreliable service area. The other thing to note is the multicolored pie wheel artifacts. They're labeled with various names. There's one to the north labeled Evansburg, There's one to the east labeled Eagleville. There's one to the southwest labeled Montclair. There's one to the west labeled Upper Providence. Those are either existing facilities or proposed facilities that are in the same process that we're here today for this proposed site. All of those facilities are active in this model, so they are actively showing what reliable service they would provide. As you can see in the middle of the propagation plot, there's a site labeled proposed. That is off for this model. And as you also can see, there's a large white area or gap in service of unreliable service for AT&T. It's roughly 1.5 miles diameter. It includes several residential areas as well as several roads, including Level Road and some of the other ones that I have labeled just so you can get your bearings.
Thank you, and
Hold on a minute. I just got rid of 500 pounds of paperwork. Let's go back to 6 with your license, all your licenses. Can you explain to me what the market is on the one you have Philadelphia, PA, the other ones you have Philadelphia, PA, Wilmington, Delaware, and Trenton, New Jersey, and the other one you have Philadelphia on it?
Sure.
Can you explain that, please?
Yeah, the FCC, when they don't know every different municipality, they break it up into what's called a basic trading area. So the government says, okay, we're going to call this market Philadelphia, but the Philadelphia market actually includes Philadelphia County, Montgomery County, Chester County, Delaware County, Bucks County, part of Mercer, a whole section down into Jersey. So even though it's titled Philadelphia, it actually does encompass this area. The same holds true for the one that's labeled Wilmington. We provided several of the different licenses that AT&T holds that covers the basic southeastern Pennsylvania area.
But it has nothing to do with this proposal that you're speaking about tonight.
It does actually, because AT&T has to hold that license that we're giving you a copy of in order to be allowed to transmit and receive the frequencies that I'm discussing with you today. So if the FCC didn't allow AT&T to do so, we wouldn't have standing and I wouldn't be telling you all about what we're trying to propose.
So if this poll was denied, would that affect the other 3 that you just gave us?
Not sure I understand your question there.
Well, you're coming in, you want to put up a 100-foot monopole on Level Road with 8 antennas?
12.
12.
Why do I keep saying 8? 12.
It's okay.
All right, 6 and 1.5 dozen the other. And then you're giving me 3 antennas, Philadelphia, Wilmington, New Jersey.
Now, those are just FCC licenses. They're copies of AT&T's license.
Okay.
If AT&T was not allowed to use this facility, they would not be able to use all of the licenses, basically, that we're showing you. AT&T has licenses for several different frequencies.
So basically, what you're telling me then, if I'm understanding you correctly, if this is denied, you have one that's up in 2015 in October, that license would be null and void?
No, I'm not saying that.
I'm losing you someplace, I don't know. That's why we're looking for new members. On this map that you have here, you have proposed, now, what'd you say about the proposal? That's not on there? That shouldn't be on there?
No, I'm just identifying where it is. It's in the middle of the map. For the sake of this reliable coverage existing,
Yeah, right there, yeah.
I don't have that active.
See, he's got, all right, now the ones you have the fans on,
Yes, sir.
what are they?
They're different facilities where AT&T is currently operating or plan to operate soon. In fact, they're operating at all of them with the exception of the one to the southwest, Montclair. That's one that they're in the same process as we're in with your township.
All right, so you're going through Upper Providence with the same process you're going through with us? You're going through Montclair with the same process? You're going through,
No.
No.
Every single one with the exception of Montclair is already built. It's already operating today. In fact, you know, you had mentioned the prison. We are on that facility already.
I'm not going to turn my TV on tomorrow. Okay. I don't have it, don't have it. Okay, thank you.
And Brock, I'm showing you what has been marked as Exhibit A8. Can you identify that exhibit for the board?
Sure, it's titled AT&T's Proposed Reliable Coverage, 850 megahertz at negative 85 dBm.
And do you have a corresponding easel? Exhibit as well as
And these are the ones that are.
screen exhibit?
Can I ask, what is DBM?
Why is it
It's just the dimension, so it's the signal level.
What does that
It's an
signify?
industry standard signal level, and that's the only reason I put it on there. I don't put it on there to confuse people.
I just wanted to know if it stood for
And the 850 megahertz,
the megahertz I've heard of. I didn't
that's
know.
one of AT&T's licenses like we were talking about. It's the most common one. It's the one they've had forever as well. It's very similar to the one that Verizon holds.
But the DBM, I don't need to understand what that stands for. Okay.
The only thing that's important there is it's an industry standard signal level. If you talk to any expert
Thank
in the industry, that's what they would use. So this propagation plot is exactly the same as the one I showed you before, with one exception, and that is I've activated the proposed facility, and you can now see the new reliable service that the proposed facility will offer. You can see that many of the areas that were white or unreliable previously are now green and reliable. So we have significantly lessened the gap in coverage with the proposed facility.
Okay, I have a question on that.
Sure.
So you still have a lot of white area there along Arcola Road and up and in, so how do you intend to give coverage to those areas?
Well, partly that is the terrain is responsible for why that's still white. I have a map behind this if you want me to switch to it now, and I can kind of illustrate why that happens.
The Montclair proposed tower, will that fill in some of that?
No, it won't. So essentially, the proposed facility sits on a relatively high plateau. So what you're looking at on this new plot, and it's titled Terrain Map, has various different colors, and it's just showing you the relative ground elevation in the area. So you can see along Level Road, which turns into our Cola Road.
I'm sorry, excuse me. Do you have a copy of that put up on the screen for the public to see?
It was submitted, so it should be in there. Yep, that's it.
And where do we find that in our file?
It's not in your packet.
No, it's up there.
So to answer your question, that road actually sits in a really low-lying area because it's right along the water. So the radio frequency has to traverse that whole plateau, and then it has to dive down into the ravine where the road sits. And that's why there's a couple areas where it's still showing unreliable service. In order for us to cover that area, we would have to go significantly higher with our antennas. As was discussed earlier, we're actually making a compromise by coming down to 100, which is what your ordinance requires. However, we would have to go significantly higher than even 130 to cover that area.
So what you proposed initially would not take care of that area?
No.
So they're just out of luck?
It's not that they're out of luck. Most of what's there is a roadway, and based on the speed limits that you would be going there, you would carry a call. So it's a compromise, but it's a compromise that AT&T can handle because most likely those calls will continue.
So do you anticipate in the future coming back for
No.
another tower to?
Nope.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
So the people that's down in the valley are out of luck.
You just explained if you're in your car on your cell phone and you're traveling on that roadway, you will not drop the call.
You shouldn't be on your phone on that driveway.
If you're a passenger.
There you go.
We got a police department down below us, so we gotta be careful.
Were you finished explaining before you entertained that question?
I think I was just stating that the majority of the areas that were unreliable or had a gap in service previously were now going to be covered with this proposed facility.
Now, there was some discussion with the first witness regarding tower height and the reduction in height regarding search ring, what the search ring represented in general. So let's take those in turn. Can you talk about, from a radio frequency engineer,
Sure.
currently, what the search ring is, why it is?
Yep. So an RF engineer looks at an area and defines where there's areas of unreliable service. He then looks at geographic areas of where he can place a facility to fill that hole. So it's kind of like a missing puzzle piece. So the engineer will, in the modeling software, choose different locations regardless of zoning code, et cetera, because he's just looking at where he can cover the area. And once he finds or narrows it down to a geographic area, he draws what's basically a box or a circle around there, and he says to the site acquisition specialist, if you can find me an existing structure to hang my antennas at such and such a height in this area, that will fulfill our gap in service. If you can't find an existing structure tall enough to house our antennas, then find me a suitable spot where we could build a structure to hang antennas on, and that would, again, fulfill the need in coverage.
So we're going back to what has been marked as Exhibit A3, which shows the search ring. Why is the search? It's a pretty tight search ring. Is that fair to say?
It is.
And why is that?
Well, as you can see from the map, we already have other facilities that are relatively nearby. It's a product of the industry that customers have began to use their phones much more, and they've began to use them in their houses much more. In fact, a very, very high percentage of all usage that AT&T sees is done by their customers in their own homes. And the only way that we can get coverage to their homes, unfortunately, is by putting these facilities in relatively close proximity to them. So the facilities that we already have which are within 1.5 miles of the facility we're talking about, don't cover the area adequately today. So that's why the search area is so small too, because we don't have the luxury of shifting this proposed facility that far out. Because once we do, we're moving into territory where we already have reliable service, and we're not going to be filling in the hole that we currently have. Like I said, it's basically a missing puzzle piece. And you can't shift that puzzle piece too far away and still try to make it fit in.
And you've looked at this exhibit, the one that's up on the screen?
Yes.
Exhibit A3. So there's our search ring, and John testified. Within our search ring, we're looking at all residential.
Yes.
Outside of our search ring?
From what I can see, that's residential as well.
So you're looking for property that's appropriate and least intrusive?
Yes.
In your opinion, this particular property and design, how does it fit in with the surroundings?
Based on my experience, I think it's a fairly suitable site because it is tucked behind a bunch of trees that will mask it from many different areas from an aesthetic standpoint. From a radio frequency standpoint, it obviously fills the need, and we can do so while also fulfilling your ordinance of staying under 100 feet, which I think is important.
And let's talk about that for a moment. There was some discussion about the reduction of height, 130 feet to 100 feet. How were you able to reduce the tower height by 30 feet?
Well, from an RF or radio frequency design standpoint, it was a compromise. We did lose some coverage on the fringe of our coverage footprint or objective area. However, we looked at those areas in depth, and most of which was similar to the question that came earlier. And they were on a small patch of roadway. We looked at the speed limits on there, or, if a passenger was in a car on a call, and we knew that, the call would still carry, and it wouldn't drop. So we were able to make that compromise and still fulfill 95% of the objectives of the site.
Excuse me, can we go back to your proposed reliable coverage?
Yes.
And the places where you already have towers,
Yes.
if they were higher, would they accommodate this section?
No, they would not. The other issue is with all of these facilities, the RF engineer constantly has to balance providing coverage, meaning we could put an antenna like they used to do 20 years ago, 400 feet in the air, and we'd have great coverage throughout the area. However, with the amount of customers that AT&T and all of the wireless providers have, that's just not possible anymore. We need a facility that only can cover 3/4 of a mile, roughly. And that's because there's so many users that are using each and every one of these much lower facilities. So that's why that's just not feasible.
The one in Montclair, that's not been approved yet?
No, it has not.
And how tall will that one be?
I believe it's proposed for 80 feet.
80?
Montclair,
You say 80?
Yes. The other thing you have to keep in mind is it's not only the height of the antennas in the air, it's also the ground that it sits on. So when you look at, how tall each one of these facilities are, they're different heights. Number one, because they're used for differing objectives, but also because they sit on different ground elevations.
Montclair is relatively low in comparison to here.
Well, just because it's labeled Montclair doesn't necessarily mean that it sits directly in Montclair. The same with all of these labeling, that they're just relatively random naming that an AT&T personnel came up with.
Do you have
at
an
one point.
address where you're putting that one?
Yes, well, it's proposed at 212 Ashenfelter Road. It's kind of similar, actually. It's tucked away, among some trees and close to residential area.
Ashenfelder Road is off of
It's off of Cider and
Cider Mill,
Arcola
Egypt,
Road,
and
yeah.
Hollow Road. Is that kind of where you're putting that? That's rather,
It's 1.7 miles away from the proposed facility, and like I
yeah,
said,
it's rather close.
It's relatively close, I'll say, but each one of these facilities, as stated earlier, only has a radius of roughly 3/4 of a mile of coverage. And that's not only coverage, but also capacity. It's based on the number of users and the type of usage. I can go through all of the distances to the other facilities if that would help you and give you the heights.
No, that won't be necessary,
I
thank you.
just had a question. Do other carriers have this gap? I mean, obviously, there are no other antennas close by.
I can assume they do, because there are no existing structures that they could house their antennas on.
'Cause I
I'm
never
not
had a
privy,
problem.
I'm not privy to other carriers' networks because they're proprietary. But like I said, we did look for existing structures or other towers that had antennas already up. Just as on the prison facility, there's several carriers on there, including AT&T. Wherever AT&T can do that, they do. It's a much quicker process, a much cheaper process, and AT&T is only concerned with providing for their customers. They're not in the tower business. They don't make any money by putting towers up.
If another carrier wanted to double up on your antenna,
Yes,
would you allow that? Does AT&T allow that?
absolutely.
So there's a possibility someone will come in at a later time looking for something else on this tower?
That's correct. Typically, carriers will separate themselves by 10 feet. So if we're at 100, the next carrier would go at 90 feet, unless they had a need to go higher, and that's what they would have to come to you
So
for.
they'd be back for another variance?
What would be the maximum number of antenna that could be on the tower?
I think the professional engineer could probably answer that better than me. It's mostly a structural concern, or how it's built.
Yeah, but it's up to 12. I thought that was for their business, the 12.
Yeah, we're proposing 12 antennas to be at the 100-foot level.
For you, for AT&T.
Correct,
But I
exclusively
mean,
for AT&T.
For other carriers, how many more could you accommodate?
I don't,
It's still a question pending, right?
yeah, go ahead.
How many-
Typically, I believe typically poles are built for 3 carriers, and like I said, the professional engineer can answer that much better than I can.
Okay.
Mr. Riffle, can I ask you a question? This may
Sure.
not be you, it may be the first gentleman that spoke. But we have a very high spot in Lower Providence. It's called the dump.
Yeah, I thought
Did you look at that?
I'm not aware of what he
Moyer's
looked at.
landfill. It sits on Level Road. It's one of the highest spots in Lower Providence. I think it's a ski slope.
Ye-
You didn't look at that?
No, he said-
So, I think what he's stating is it's not inside the search ring, and what I was explaining earlier is we don't have a whole lot of leeway to move anywhere outside of that search ring, because then we start to cover areas we already have coverage in, and we won't cover the areas that we
But
don't.
if you're looking for height, you can't go any higher.
I'm not necessarily looking for height, though.
That's why you come down to 100, from 130.
We need to prove that it's the minimum height necessary to achieve our coverage objective. So if we're asking for more, we're not asking for the minimum relief
So they're just
from your
doing away
ordinance.
with one waiver.
All right.
Out of curiosity, this dump property, is it up on this aerial?
It sits up pretty close to that.
It's in the back, it's down in the corner down here, where the Google Earth mark is. It's
Down
probably right up in there.
Down there.
Yeah,
Down in
right
there,
up
around there.
that area.
So it's well outside of our search ring, and
It would be pretty close to the prison facility.
Yeah.
Exactly. that's
Exactly,
right.
and that's the problem, because we're already there, and we're already providing, if I can just back up on my previous plot here.
Excuse me, you're already on the prison
Yes.
Yes.
with your tower?
It's not, I don't know if it's our tower, but AT&T is on that facility.
And that's not doing the job for you?
No, it's not.
Being the highest spot in the area, it's not going to do any good.
AT&T on that facility is located at 150 feet. And if you look at this plot right here, entitled AT&T's Existing Reliable Coverage, you can actually see the reliable service that comes from that prison facility. And as you can see, it does not provide green or reliable service over to the area that we're trying to cover with the proposed
All right,
facility.
thank you.
Sure.
So just to be clear, 100 feet to the tops of the antennas. What's our center line of the antennas?
Right around 98 feet.
In your professional opinion, is that the minimum height required to achieve AT&T's coverage objectives here?
Yes.
And was a study prepared regarding effects on human exposure?
Yes, it was.
And I'm going to show you what has been marked as Exhibit A9. Can you identify that exhibit?
Sure, it's an electromagnetic emissions analysis completed by DBM Engineering. Essentially what that does is take into account industry standard calculations for the emissions output of this facility. And in summary, this facility is 120 times below the FCC limit. So what that would mean is you would have to put 120 of the exact same facilities in the exact same spot just to approach the FCC's guidelines or limits. So we're well below the emission standards.
Can you explain that, and I don't mean to take away your questioning, Mr. Kuche, but I think it's an important issue. I think it's one of the issues that you're going to hear about from some of the residents. So explain for us what that means. There's a certain standard the FCC sets in terms of emissions, if you will, from a tower and what the body can tolerate. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. Can you tell us more about that?
Well, number one, I'm not a medical doctor, and all I can refer to is the document that the firm produced.
Is that witness here tonight?
No.
So what's
So-
your understanding of what this report tells us?
So I'm going to refer you, or anyone else who wishes to look at it, to the front page. And basically, what it states is a summary of findings, that the maximum exposure to radio frequency exposure levels from this proposed AT&T facility is far below the FCC exposure limits. And the engineer who did this uses upper limit assumptions for the AT&T equipment configuration, meaning worst case. And he comes up with the cumulative radio frequency exposure levels, and then he compares that to what the FCC allows. And what he states in his summary is that it is 120 times less than what the FCC limit allows for all public access.
Which section are you reading from?
The very first
Oh, that
page.
one? Oh, okay, got it.
But as a radio frequency engineer, obviously you've been around this for over 17 years.
Yes.
What is the risk of exposure to radio frequency of an intensity that's not necessarily understood as being safe? Do you know?
I can't offer any expertise on that because I'm not a medical doctor, but what I can tell you is my own opinion, and that is I live right across the street from one in far less proximity with many more carriers, and I sleep great at night and I have great service. There's been many studies, and the FCC uses those studies to base their guidelines. And if it meets the guidelines, the FCC says it's okay.
Okay, thanks.
I hate to keep beating on this reliable coverage, but since they're talking, if you went back to your original height of the antenna, would that then fill in this additional gaps on here for coverage?
No, it would not.
So that height was not necessary to begin with?
Well, it was probably picked to fill the majority of all possible objectives they could with that facility, and then to compromise and meet the ordinance while also still meeting a high level or a high percentage of those objectives, it was dropped to 100 feet.
Gotcha.
Question.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Radio frequency expert,
Yes.
would that radio frequency affect an airplane coming in for a landing anyway?
The FCC sets guidelines and only allows licensees such as AT&T to transmit and receive within their own license band. So AT&T is only allowed to transmit and receive in their band. They're not allowed to transmit outside of that. So no, it wouldn't affect anything outside of their band. In addition, other carriers or other radio users are not allowed to transmit or receive inside of AT&T's band, thereby mitigating any possibility for interference. If there is any interference, then the FCC goes to the licensee and asks them to mitigate it.
The reason why I'm asking, directly across from this tower is a landing strip.
Yep.
And the gentleman that has the landing strip's been flying in and out of there for many, many years. And that's the reason why I'm asking you if he's coming in for a landing and whether anything that's coming off that tower will affect anything on his controls or anything like that.
Again, based on the fact that AT&T is only allowed to transmit and receive in their licensed band and no one else is allowed in there, that pretty much mitigates the opportunity for radio frequency interference.
But you're still not answering my question. I mean, you're an expert in this, according to your letter. I'm asking you if there's anything on that tower will affect any of the controls on that airplane that's coming in for a landing.
Well, I don't know what frequencies he's using, but he's not using AT&T's because only AT&T can use them. What I can tell you is AT&T sits directly across from the Philadelphia airport, as does Verizon, as does T-Mobile. They also have facilities inside the airport. So if Philadelphia International can not have any interference with AT&T, I'm pretty sure that...
Oh, you'll get a chance, ma'am. You'll get a chance. You'll get a chance.
There's very, 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 very little opportunity for interference.
Okay. You're on TV and you're also on the tape.
Is there someone else that would be more qualified to answer that question? Could we seek that answer somewhere else?
Respective to what?
To knowing if it would have an effect?
Well, number one, I stated before I answered that I don't know what frequencies they use, but all I can tell you is they're not the same as what AT&T uses. So if they're not the same, there's very little opportunity for interference.
So it's not the same frequency, but it might be something else. So I think that's a question that really needs to be
No,
investigated.
I think what he's saying is that only AT&T can broadcast on the frequency band that it has a license for.
Right.
So as a result, unless the pilot has the same frequency, which he wouldn't have because AT&T has an exclusive to that band, there wouldn't
Okay.
be interference. I think that's the point that he's
Is that
trying to
what you're-
make.
I would
Okay.
absolutely agree. Thank you.
Well, he went to Drexel.
Actually, I didn't. But thanks for the compliment.
In terms of interference, I want to direct your attention to Exhibit 810. Can you identify that exhibit for the board?
Sure. It's a letter basically stating a lot of what I just testified to regarding interference and the fact that AT&T is not allowed to transmit or receive outside of their licensed band. And in that is how interference is mitigated.
In all of your years of experience as a radio frequency engineer, have you ever heard of interference caused by the output of these antennas?
No.
Hypothetically, what would happen if there was interference from one of these sites?
Typically, the adjoining licensee, meaning the company that owns the frequency adjacent to AT&T, which in this case would be Verizon, would be the first to acknowledge any interference. And if they did, they would contact the FCC or AT&T directly and say, you have a piece of malfunctioning equipment, you're transmitting in our band, you have to rectify this in 24 hours. And that's what would happen.
Now, are these facilities monitored regularly?
24/7, 365.
Someone there?
No, they have remote monitoring for every single one of their facilities to monitor how the radios are operating at any one time. They also have security provisions at each one of their facilities to make sure that there isn't any type of vandalism or break-ins to their shelters that would disrupt the radio equipment.
So any problem at any of these facilities would be detected by the folks remotely.
Yeah, their network operations center monitors all of the facilities. Obviously, if any one of their facilities had a problem with any of their radios, that's lost revenue, so you better believe that any of the wireless carriers are monitoring that very intently, and if there's a problem, they're on it immediately.
And we were just talking about actually a landing strip, some FAA issues. I'm going to direct your attention to the exhibits housed in Exhibit A11. Could you identify those exhibits for the board?
Sure. It's a Federal Airways and Airspace Summary Report. It just basically takes into account the exact location of the facility, the site elevation, the structure height, and then it performs, or in this case, it outlines if it's an issue for the FAA. And in this case, the summary is, notice to the FAA is not required at the analyzed location, and the height for slope, height, or straight-in procedures.
Can you speak English for us and tell us what that means?
It basically says the FAA doesn't have any issues with putting the facility at this height, at this location.
It does say, however, here that the traffic pattern airspace is the climb and descent area, because I know that that's a main corridor along ridge there for aircraft. That's stuff that's way high up, goes to Philadelphia, I believe. This isn't necessarily, oh, I see, they do have Kunda's strip noted here.
Private.
This is, and also, just so you know, when and if AT&T was approved, what they would do is they would have to register this with the FCC and FAA, and there would be a final screening to analyze if there were any issues. Obviously, AT&T complies with all federal regulations, including the FAA and FCC.
But now you have a tower sticking up out of into the sky where a private plane typically would traverse or fly in. I guess that's just an issue of, there'd be a beacon on there, I suspect, and other ways of identifying it, I presume, right?
I'm not necessarily an expert in that field. What I can say is if the FAA deems that a lighting is required, it would be installed.
Well, they say in the report here, it says a possible impact to private landing facility, and that's referencing Air Kunda. And obviously when you see that, it sends up a red flag. Possible. Okay, it's possible. What does that mean?
Yeah, because the others say no impact.
I don't want to suggest that the tail wags the dog, or who's ever there first gets the wins, but, I mean, he's been there for a long time.
Long time. Who said that?
Okay. Other questions? I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, you're finished?
I am finished.
Other questions of the board?
Thanks, Mr. Rick.
Not yet,
Any questions?
not yet.
Not yet, or
Well, they may come later,
for this witness?
perhaps.
Structure is
Or before you go, I had a couple of questions, I'm sorry. You were talking about the license itself, the FCC license. And I thought I picked up on in your testimony that it was mandated that you do this. Is that a fair statement? Mandated that you install something to provide coverage in this area? Is that what your license requires?
I wouldn't say that I said it was mandated
Okay.
for us to install this location. In general, to keep the FCC license that AT&T has, and they have several, they have to build out that license enough that they provide coverage, reliable coverage, for enough of the population area or percentage of the population area that their licenses cover.
All right, so that shows good faith, due diligence to try and provide coverage for people that would need it, and that's where the FCC is interested in making sure that people have that availability. But there's no mandate in the licensure that says that you have to cover every particular piece of ground or area.
That's correct.
If the application is granted, what does that do for AT&T other than provides better coverage? Does it increase any sort of revenue stream? Does it change any ability to shut down other towers? Does it do anything differently other than just provide additional service?
For my expertise, the only thing I could probably answer two of your questions was, would it allow for them to shut down other towers? And I would say no.
And if it were denied, how would it impact AT&T?
AT&T's customers that sit within that unreliable area would have subpar or unreliable service.
And I think that what you were getting at before when you were talking about that you're placing the tower in this range to provide better service for the folks in that area, including the residents, is that because you're seeing more residents go with cell phones as opposed to landline phones?
That's absolutely true.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
In fact, especially as it relates to emergency services, well over 90% of all 911 calls go through cell phones and not home phones anymore. And there's also a very large push to not having a home phone at all. Many people throughout the country, especially in more mature areas like we live in, are abandoning the standard hard line in their house and exclusively relying on a wireless device.
But if you looked in the audience here tonight, it looks like there's a lot of folks out here who live in that area, and I presume that they're here because they don't want the tower. And if the coverage is there to provide them with the service, can't they make the choice and stay with a landline? I mean, they don't seem to be complaining that they want coverage in that area.
Well, as an RF engineer, I also have to take into account people that traverse the area as well. For instance, Level Road, which is right where we're on, handles 5,500 cars a day. Many of those people would be AT&T customers. People that are visiting, maybe people that live there are AT&T customers. I'd also state that since AT&T is the largest or second largest, depending on what area you're in, carrier in the country, that many of these people are also AT&T customers. And they rely on RF engineers like myself or many others at the office to make sure that their phones work, whether they want to admit it or not.
The Evansburg active tower that's listed on your map there, says Evansburg up there by Germantown.
Yes, sir.
Is that a mono tower as well, do you know?
No, it's actually a lattice. So are you familiar with what a lattice looks like?
I know the term, but I'm not
Sure.
so sure it's the same thing in your world.
So a lattice tower has all the crisscrossing X's all the way up. So it has a much, much wider base, and then it tapers off to the top. It's kind of like if you look at a Pico transmission tower that has all of the different crisscross legs. That's what a lattice tower looks like.
Do you know where this one's located?
Yes, it's 3944 Germantown Pike, Collegeville.
Anybody know what that is?
It's a bookstore.
It's right after the split,
Yeah.
you know, between Ridge and Germantown.
It's our bookstore.
Oh, that's our bookstore.
That was a softball to let you know that I don't know where the adult bookstore is.
Yeah, right. I know your license number. He parks at the chicken store.
So it's on that site, it sounds like?
What is on that site?
That tower is on that site? It's not, is it right at the V
No,
there?
yeah, it looks like it's further back.
I'm just trying to figure out if it's in the park or not. Doesn't look like it's in the park.
I don't believe it's in the park. It's just south of Germantown Pike Road, or
Do you
Pike,
have
rather.
any towers in the park? Do you know? Does AT&T have any towers?
Evansburg Park?
Yeah.
No.
They weren't great.
Well, that's why I was asking the question, to see if they had one somewhere else, then, yeah, it's what's good for the goose. Right. Okay. All right, thanks.
Thank you.
Do you have any idea of the cost of these things?
I'm sorry?
Do you have any idea on the cost of these towers?
I think the professional engineer will have a better idea than I would.
All right, we'll catch him then. I got your note down here. Professional engineer.
Get ready. He's a tough cross-examiner.
I always wanted to be a lawyer.
Do you have any redirect or anything?
Nope, I don't.
Anybody have any questions?
Not at the moment.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
My next and final witness is our professional engineer, Mr. Pete Chikalis.
You want to take a break? All right, go ahead. Give us 5 minutes, will you, please?
Do we take
Anybody
a
have
break?
to go get a drink of water or something like that? We're going to take 5.
Do you want some here, Joyce? or- You have your bottle?
You'll be able to ask them.
How do we find out